Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we are really excited to be tackling a topic that I think we all struggle with in our lives, and that's forgiveness. And we're going to be looking at it specifically through the teachings of Jesus and how it can really lead us away from bitterness.
Right.
We all know that dealing with hurt and betrayal can be so incredibly difficult, and it can leave us feeling bitter and resentful.
Mm.
Forgiveness, it's not always easy, but get ready for some real aha moments as we uncover what forgiveness really means according to Jesus, and just as importantly, what it really doesn't mean.
I think that is so important because one of the things about the teachings of Jesus on forgiveness is that it's often so radically misunderstood.
Yeah. So let's start there. What are some of those common misconceptions about forgiveness? Like, what does it not look like?
Oh, I think a lot of times we think that forgiveness means that we forget what happened or that we just pretend that the hurt didn't matter, or even worse, that we just allow someone to keep on hurting us. Oh. And that is so not what true forgiveness is all about.
Yeah. So if those aren't accurate, then how does our source define true forgiveness?
Well, I think the source defines forgiveness as a deliberate choice to release resentment and anger.
Okay.
And I think that's a crucial point. It's a choice, not just a feeling. It doesn't mean that we are condoning the wrong or that it was okay, but we're choosing to release its hold on us.
You're bringing up a really interesting point there because I think we often say, I forgive you to someone, and yet we still harbor all this resentment in our hearts.
Yeah.
So how do we really bridge that gap between just saying the words and truly embodying that choice to forgive?
Well, that's a really important point that you bring up. And, I think that the example of Jesus on the cross speaks volumes about this.
Oh, yeah.
In the midst of really unimaginable suffering, he chooses to forgive those who are responsible for his pain.
Yeah.
He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Wow, that is so powerful.
It really is.
Talk about leading by example. You're right. It really drives home the point that forgiveness is less about the other person and much more about the state of our own hearts.
Exactly. And I think that if Jesus could forgive under those circumstances, it really does show us that forgiveness is possible no matter what we've been through.
Yet we all know how incredibly difficult it can be, especially when the hurt runs very deep.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it feels almost impossible to even consider forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely.
So what do we do in those moments when we desperately want to forgive, but we just can't seem to find it within ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I think that the source offers some incredible encouragement in these moments.
Okay. What's that?
It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's such a powerful reminder that we don't have to muster up the strength to forget on our own, but we can lean into God's grace and his power to see us through.
I love that. And it reminds me that we're not alone in this struggle either.
Right.
In those really, really tough moments when forgiveness seems so impossible, I think it's a great time to stop and ask ourselves, what is this unforgiveness doing to me?
That's a really great point.
Shifting that focus inward and really examining the impact of unforgiveness on our own well-being.
And I think that's where we begin to uncover the real danger of unforgiveness because it's not just hurting the other person, but it really is festering within us and impacting our entire lives.
So tell me more about that. What does our source say about the consequences of holding on to unforgiveness? What happens when we let bitterness take root?
Well, it uses this very striking image.
Okay.
It describes unforgiveness as a bitter root that can really poison our inner peace, our relationships, and even our spiritual growth.
A bitter root. Wow, that is such a vivid description.
It really is.
It conjures up this image of something that might start small, but then it spreads and contaminates everything around it.
And that's the thing. It highlights that insidious nature of unforgiveness because it doesn't just stay contained. It really does seep into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
It steals our joy. It creates distance between us and other people, and it really hinders our relationship with God. It's like carrying around a heavy weight that we weren't meant to bear.
Almost like unforgiveness is a prison that we create for ourselves.
In many ways it is. But thankfully, the source doesn't just leave us with a diagnosis. It actually offers us a path towards healing as well.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that. What are some practical steps that our source outlines to sort of pull up this bitter root and break free from the grip of bitterness?
One of the first things that it encourages us to do is to pray for the person who has hurt us. I know that might sound impossible.
Yeah, especially when you're really deeply wounded.
Right, because against our very human nature.
Exactly.
But the source emphasizes that prayer has the power to really soften our hearts, even toward those who've wronged us. And, it's not about condoning their actions, but it's about inviting God's transformative work into their lives and into our own.
That's a really powerful perspective shift. Instead of just dwelling on the hurt, we're choosing to turn to God and asking him to bring healing and restoration.
Right.
It makes me think of that verse, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
Yes, exactly. We can really release that burden of judgment and punishment, knowing that God is ultimately just and will handle things in his perfect timing. And, along with prayer, the source also suggests speaking blessings instead of curses.
So rather than just replaying the offense in our minds and, dwelling on all the negativity, we can actively choose to speak words of life and truth over the situation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about intentionally shifting our focus from the pain to the potential for healing and restoration, and, recognizing that while we can't change the past, we can choose how we respond to it in the present.
These are really practical and powerful steps. I love that. But I think it's important to remember that forgiveness isn't just a one-time event.
Absolutely. It is not a destination we arrive at. It is a journey that we embark on.
Okay, this sounds interesting. So what does that journey look like?
Well, it involves embracing a fairly radical concept,
Okay, I'm listening.
forgiving 77 times.
77 times. That seems like a lot of forgiveness. Is that even realistic?
Well, I think Jesus wasn't giving us a literal number here, but emphasizing that unlimited nature of forgiveness.
Oh, so it's not about keeping count, but about cultivating an attitude of constant forgiveness.
Exactly. And the reason for this is very simple. We live in a broken world where hurt is inevitable. People will disappoint us, betray us, and hurt us intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, we're bound to encounter these types of situations pretty regularly.
Exactly. But holding on to these hurts will only weigh us down and prevent us from experiencing true freedom and joy.
So it's in our own best interest to really choose forgiveness even when it's hard.
Absolutely. Forgiveness is a gift that we give to ourselves as much as it is a gift we give to others.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It frees us from the bitterness and the resentment that can hold us captive for so long.
And it opens the door to experience the healing power of God's grace in our lives.
Even though it's not easy, the benefits of forgiveness really do outweigh the cost of holding on to anger and bitterness.
Without a doubt. And something that I find really encouraging is that the source reminds us that it's never too late to start the journey of forgiveness.
Sometimes we feel like we've held on to pain for so long that it's beyond repair.
But the source emphasizes that no matter how long we've carried this burden of unforgiveness, Jesus is always ready to help us let go and experience his healing touch.
There's so much hope in that, It means that we can always come back to a place of grace regardless of our past.
Exactly. And it's also really important to remember that we don't have to do this alone.
Yeah.
The source reminds us that we can cast all our anxiety on him because he cares for us. So we can bring our hurts and our struggles to Jesus and trust him to carry the weight for us.
That is such a beautiful promise to hold on to, and it brings us right back to that core message that forgiveness really is a choice. It's a decision to release that burden and really trust in God's power to heal and restore us.
Yeah, and that choice, that decision is available to us each and every day. We can choose to walk in forgiveness, to let go of bitterness, and to embrace the freedom and the peace that come from releasing the hurt. It really is. And I think sometimes the most profound act of forgiveness that we can offer is to ourselves.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. What do you mean by forgiving ourselves?
Well, so often we hold ourselves to these impossible standards.
Oh, yeah.
We're constantly replaying our past mistakes in our minds.
Right.
And carrying around so much guilt and shame, that is such a heavy burden for us to bear.
It's true. We can definitely be our own harshest critics.
Yeah.
I know, I am.
Yeah, and it can feel like we're just stuck in this endless cycle of, self-recrimination. And so that's where self-forgiveness really comes in.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging our imperfections, accepting, that we made mistakes, and releasing that grip of guilt and shame.
Right.
It's about extending that same grace to ourselves that we would extend to others.
I love it. It's about breaking free from that prison of self-condemnation.
Yeah.
And really embracing the freedom that comes with God's unconditional love and forgiveness.
Exactly. And I think, it's important to remember that self-forgiveness doesn't mean that we are condoning our past actions or making excuses for them.
Right.
It simply means that we acknowledge them, we learn from them, and we choose to move forward in grace.
It's about releasing that weight of the past and embracing the potential for growth and transformation in the present.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's not about staying stuck in the pain of the past, but it's about opening ourselves up to the possibility of healing and new beginnings.
It's about trading bitterness for freedom,
Yeah.
resentment for peace, and ultimately love over anger.
Beautifully said. And, as we're talking about this, I'm reminded of that parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18.
Oh,
It's a really powerful illustration of the connection between receiving forgiveness and extending it to others.
that's the one where the king forgives his servant this enormous debt, but then that same servant refuses to forgive a much smaller debt that was owed to him by another servant.
Exactly. And the king is outraged by the servant's lack of compassion
Yeah.
and, throws him in prison. It's a stark reminder that if we want to experience the fullness of God's forgiveness in our own lives, we must be willing to extend that same forgiveness to others.
It's a beautiful illustration of the reciprocity of forgiveness,
Yes,
how the grace that we receive is meant to flow through us to others.
it really is. And I think it really challenges us to examine our own hearts and ask ourselves, am I holding on to any unforgiveness that is hindering my ability to experience God's grace and mercy?
That's such a convicting question.
It is.
It forces us to confront any bitterness or resentment that we might be harboring
Mhm.
and to consider the impact that it's having on our own spiritual well-being.
And I think that's really where the transformation begins, when we're willing to let go of those things that are holding us back and to embrace the freedom and the healing that come with forgiveness.
It's a journey that requires honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to surrender our pain to God.
Hmm.
But ultimately, it leads us closer to Him and to the fullness of life that He desires for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, as we're getting toward the end of our deep dive today, I'm really struck by the sheer depth and complexity of this topic.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as forgiveness can be so multifaceted and so challenging.
It really is. And I think it speaks to the transformative power of forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
how it can really impact our lives on so many levels, emotionally, relationally, and even spiritually.
It's not just about saying the words, but it's about a real profound shift in our hearts and our minds,
Right.
a willingness to release that grip of the past and to embrace the possibility of healing and new beginnings.
It's about choosing to walk in freedom rather than captivity,
Mm-hmm.
in love rather than resentment, and in grace rather than judgment.
It's a huge testament to that redemptive work of Christ in our lives.
Yeah.
How He takes our brokenness and makes us whole
Hmm.
and our pain and turns it into purpose.
And I think that's what makes forgiveness so beautiful. It's such a reflection of God's own heart towards us.
Yeah.
A heart that is always ready to forgive, to heal, and to restore.
It's that reminder that we're never beyond the reach of His grace and mercy, no matter what we've done or what's been done to us.
Absolutely. And so, on that note, as we start to wrap up our deep dive on forgiveness today, I want to leave you with a final thought to kind of ponder as you go.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about this. If forgiveness really is a reflection of God's heart, what does that say about His desire for us to walk in forgiveness towards others? And how can we better align our hearts with His in this area?
That is such a powerful question for us to consider.
It is.
It challenges us to go beyond just understanding forgiveness, but to actively pursue it as a way of life, as a way of reflecting God's love and grace to the world around us.
And that, I believe, is the essence of what it means to live a life transformed by the power of forgiveness.
Yeah, it really does make you think, doesn't it, about, the deeper implications of forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's not just about letting go of anger, but it's about reflecting God's love
Right.
in a very tangible way.
Exactly. I think it's about understanding that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but really it's a demonstration of strength, a strength that comes from aligning ourselves with God's heart.
It's about choosing to break free from that cycle of pain and resentment that can so easily entrap us,
Right.
and instead stepping into that freedom and healing that God offers.
You said that perfectly. And, one of the things that strikes me as we're wrapping up this deep dive is that forgiveness is not a passive concept.
Right.
It's not something that just happens to us. It requires intentionality, effort, a willingness to surrender our hurt to God.
It's a choice we make, sometimes over and over and over again, especially when we're dealing with deep wounds or recurring patterns of hurt.
Absolutely. And I
Right.
think that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
in those day-to-day moments,
Right.
when we're faced with that choice
Mm-hmm.
to either harbor resentment or to extend grace.
It's about those small, seemingly insignificant decisions
Mhm.
that really shape the trajectory of our lives and
Oh,
relationships.
absolutely. And that's why it's so important to remember that we're not alone in this journey.
Yeah.
We have the Holy Spirit to guide us, to comfort us, and to empower us to forgive as Christ forgave us.
There's so much comfort in that isn't there.
Right.
To know that we don't have to rely on our own very limited strength and understanding.
Right.
We can tap into the infinite resources of God's grace and mercy.
Exactly. And, I think one of the most beautiful aspects of forgiveness is that it's never too late to start.
Mm.
No matter how long we've held on to anger or bitterness,
Yeah.
God is always ready to meet us right where we are and help us to begin that process of healing and restoration.
Yeah. That's such a powerful reminder, especially for those who are maybe carrying the weight of past hurts
Yeah,
or feeling just overwhelmed by the enormity of forgiveness.
right. It's a reminder that God's grace is bigger than any pain we've experienced,
Hmm.
any mistake we've made, or any wrong that's been done to us.
It's a reminder that we're always loved,
Yes.
always forgiven,
Hmm.
and always capable of extending that same love and forgiveness to others.
Beautifully said. And with that in mind, I think it's fitting as we end our deep dive to circle back to that question that we posed earlier.
Yeah.
What is one concrete step that you can take today towards forgiving someone in your life?
It really is an invitation, isn't it?
It is.
To move beyond just simply contemplating it,
Right.
but to take action and
Mm.
embrace that transformative power of forgiveness.
It could be as simple as offering a silent prayer for that person,
Mm-hmm.
writing a letter expressing your feelings, or even just making a conscious decision to release the resentment that you've been harboring.
Whatever that step may be, we encourage you to take it.
Yeah.
With courage and trust in God's guidance and grace.
Absolutely. He is faithful to meet us in our pain and to lead us toward healing and wholeness.
And remember, even small steps in the direction of forgiveness can have a huge impact on your life and relationships.
Yeah, they really can.
So, dear listeners, as we close out this deep dive into the profound and really multifaceted nature of forgiveness,
Mhm.
we hope that you leave feeling inspired, challenged, and empowered to embrace the freedom and healing that come from choosing to forgive.
And may you experience the fullness of God's grace and mercy as you continue on this journey of transformation and growth.